Tonight on the All Kinds Weather Forecast, we recap the thrashing in the swamp. The Miami Hurricanes take down the Florida Gators 41-17. We recap the game and where the Gators go from here. This is the All Kinds Weather Forecast. And welcome into another episode of the All Kinds Weather Forecast. I am your host, Chris Yanes, alongside my co-host, Neil Schulman, here in the heart of Gator Nation. A Gator Nation that is reeling now after a 41-17 thrashing by the Miami Hurricanes yesterday in the swamp. But before we get to all of that, I want to shout out our sponsor, 401k Generation. The All Kinds Weather Forecast is proudly sponsored by 401k Generation, the wealth management company that helps you invest today for your future tomorrow. Their team of advisors is committed to providing guidance and education for your 401k plan and its participants. And they also offer a range of enrollment solutions tailored to meet the unique needs of your company's 401k plan. Whether it's saving for your college, for your child's college, investment advice, or even your retirement, 401k Generation's team of advisors makes getting to know you their top priority. Their advisors will tailor a path to assist you in navigating life's financial milestones and reaching your financial goals. 401k Generation, building stronger futures, one generation at a time. For more information, contact them at 866-998-5879 or visit their website at 401kgeneration.com. And we certainly could be building a stronger future here in Gainesville. We're hoping to build a stronger future here on this podcast and on this platform. So please, to help us do that, make sure you like this show down below, leave a comment. Let us know your reaction and your thoughts to yesterday's game and whether you think you are ready to move on from Coach Billy Napier, which we will get into later tonight. All right, Neil. This is, I think, a therapy session, if you will, for us and for anybody listening or watching us here on our YouTube channel. This is a therapy session today. We're going to be talking about, we're going to recap the game. We got to talk about the game. We got to give our analysis of the game, what went wrong for the Gators on the field. And then, a bigger part of where we got to go from here. So first off, we'll go into the recap first here, Neil, and then we'll get your reaction and your thoughts. But to recap the game, it started badly and it finished badly. The Gators only got one first down on the opening drive. They didn't get a lot of first downs really at all in the first half. In fact, if it wasn't for a 71-yard touchdown run by Montrell Johnson Jr., the Gators wouldn't have had too much to show on offense at all for the game. That was a third of their offense was completed in one play. Cam Ward was exactly who they said he was and not who we thought he was. 26 for 35, 385 yards, 3 touchdowns. He did throw the interception to Shamar James, but that was his only mistake on an otherwise pretty incredible day. Xavier Restrepo was him, 7 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown. The Miami Hurricanes combined for 144 on the ground, 2 touchdowns, both from Mark Fletcher Jr., a commit that was once considering the Florida Gators. And they put up a grand total of 41 points, which is a record against the Florida Gators in their opener, another history, snapping a 34-game winning streak for home openers for the Gators. It dates back to 1989. Another splendid record that has now been broken under the Billy Napier regime. The Hurricanes had 529 yards, the most against the Gators in an opener. 3 records set in one day. 385 through the air, 144 rushing. Very clean game for the Hurricanes. Only 2 penalties for 26 yards. Honestly, it was a clean game outside of the turnovers in this. Both teams combined for only 4 penalties. The Gators, on the other hand, 261 yards of offense, 122 through the air, 139 rushing. And like I said, 100 out of those 139, 71 came on the Montrell Johnson touchdown run before halftime. Graham Mertz probably played his worst game as a Florida Gator. 11 for 20, not even 100 yards through the air, 91 yards total passing, 1 interception. DJ Lagway had to come in relief due to the Graham Mertz concussion. 30 of 6 for 31 yards and an interception. Johnson was the best player on offense, 106 yards and a touchdown. Eugene Wilson did have 7 catches for 50 yards. And Grayson Howard led the team in tackles with 6. So that is the statistics of the game. Miami led at halftime 24-10 and didn't really let up whatsoever, Neil. This was a blowout. They would go on to win 41-17. Florida certainly had their chances and their moments to make this game closer, but they did not capitalize when they could. And that is where we get the result that we have. So, Neil, I want to give you the floor. Excuse me, I know my voice is a little bit hoarse. We were, for the first half at least, screaming in the stadium, but let's get your reaction, Neil. Your thoughts on what this game means, and then I'll give my thoughts. This is tough. This is a tough loss.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are as follows. There are two possibilities here. Possibility number one, and I thought long and hard about this. As people know, I live in Charleston. I had family in Jacksonville, so I had a lot of time in the car to think about this. Possibility number one, I do not say this from an elementary school playground sense. I don't say this from a like wiggling your fingers type of sense. I say this strictly from a go look at his Wikipedia page, use Google for what it's meant for sense. Strictly from a literal sense, Billy Napier is just a loser. That's just what he is. And oh, I've got facts to back that up. Those facts are going to come later in spades. But for now, suffice to say, he's 11-15 overall as a head coach. That's not a mistake. He has quite literally lost more games than he has won in a non 2 or 3 or 4 game sample size. Year 1, losing season. Year 2, losing season. Year 3, probably going to be another losing season. Whether it's Richardson throwing multiple picks to Kentucky, special teams blowing games with duplicate jersey penalties or substitution infractions, defense giving up a school record 702 yards in one game, surrendering a 4th and 17 with the game on the line, or more recently just getting flat out bullied in the trenches. His teams lose games. That's just what they do. It doesn't matter what form it takes. They will sometimes get creative with the form that it takes. At the end of the day, they lose games. And last year, my catchphrase for the Gators was good teams find ways to win games, bad teams find ways to lose games. Well, that sentiment now has to be applied to Billy Napier as a whole because it's not just one team anymore. It's the program. That's who he is. He has overhauled this roster 2 times since he got here. Really 3, because overhauls always happen when a new coach takes over. 3 very different teams with very different names on the backs of their jerseys and the same results, the Gators losing games. So again, I don't mean this in an ad hominem way. I just mean go Google his record way. The guy is just a loser. That's just his DNA. That's what he is, at least in the Power 5. He's just not a good coach. That's the first possibility, that he genuinely believed what he was seeing in the offseason would lead to good results on the field, and he was simply very badly mistaken. That's possibility number one. Number 2 is that he was indeed concerned with what he was watching all off season long and maybe even terrified at what he was seeing all off season long. But instead of admitting to such, which, I'll grant him is not generally considered a good PR move by a coach to throw his team under the bus in the offseason. But anyway, to just go in the complete opposite direction and absolutely gaslight the fan base or more bluntly, just lie. Like, yeah, no, strength and conditioning team does its job. Offensive line really looks better. We're seeing progress in the trenches, and just plain lie to us when he knew better. I don't think it's that one. I think it's the first one. I really don't think it is that latter option. I think he is a good man. I think he is a guy of integrity and character. So I'm going to take the kinder approach here and assume that he is just plain and simple not fit for SEC football as a head coach. But what is not up for debate is that there is an enormous disconnect between what he was saying and implying all off season long and what we saw on the field between the lines or on lines of scrimmage between the white lines, which was owned by Miami. And side note, Chris, I'm going to tease something else here. We're going to get to this later in the show. But if you remember the Georgia game last year in our recap pod, the OG listeners remember this, we talked about head-to-head misses at the expense of Georgia, like Janelle Aguero, who blocked the punt for his safety, Carson Beck, who shredded us at quarterback. Well, guess what? One of Miami's top offensive linemen, Samson Okunlola, another miss by Napier in Florida to a rival that cost us. But I'll let you take that in more detail later. The point is, it doesn't matter what form this or that takes, doesn't matter how it looks, doesn't matter who's to blame. The Gators are a losing program under Billy Napier. It is historically bad right now. And at some point, you just have to accept it's not a bad team. It's not bad luck. It's not a bad stretch. It's just who the guy is. And my takeaway is it's simply not possible for whatever you want to attribute it to. It's not possible to say what Billy Napier was saying all off season long, or to do what his teams did in his first 2 seasons, to then see what we saw on Saturday, and then for that coach to survive for very long, barring an absolute miracle.
No, Neil, I think you hit it right on the head. I think that was really fair, concise analysis. We say on this pod, our motto is we keep it respectful, but keep it real. And I think you did that just there in your reaction. And I know, like, I honestly, for a lot of our listeners and watchers out there, I think that was a really took the emotion out of it and purely looked at the numbers. The reality is Billy Napier now is in his third season as head football coach. He's 11-15. He's 1-8 versus his rivals now. He has consistently lost big recruiting battles, both in high school and the transfer portal, to his rivals. He has had to face them and has lost to the majority of those teams. The only rival that he beat was Tennessee, and what I actually argue he has beaten Tennessee for the recruits that he's wanted for the most part. So at this stage in the game, it's year 3. You said at SEC Media Days you had never seen more competitive depth on this roster than at any point. That is your quote. Those are your words, not mine. You said that you trusted these guys. You said that the program was ready to move in the right direction. If that is the case, teams do not open for the second year in a row unprepared. This is the second opener in a row where, and by the way, Neil, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
I
But
just know I'm laughing hysterically at all this. It's not just unprepared, you're wildly unprepared. How
yes,
do you have a replicate jersey infraction like that? How,
right.
I mean, I'm
And to
sorry.
be fair, that didn't happen. Unfortunately, I mean, actually,
Oh yeah, he avoided that. Yeah, progress.
you know,
Yeah, good
I mean,
job,
well, I
Billy.
mean, I guess special teams actually weren't a problem yesterday, thank God, but it could have been even worse. But the 2 years in a row, uninspired football, a team that looked unmotivated, that did not want to be there, a coaching staff with no creativity, no sense of urgency on the field in the opener. When you knew this was the game, Mario Cristobal was hired 8 days after Billy Napier. You have fought for the same recruits for the last 3 years. Your record going into this game was one game less than he was. You knew you were being compared to him. You used to coach it with him on the Alabama staff, that vaunted 2015 Alabama staff everybody talks about. You, as a competitor, I consider myself a competitor. I think a lot of people out there probably feel the same. As a competitor, how could you not want to come out and give everything you possibly have? But I mean, at halftime, he told Katie George on before he went into the tunnel that we had some explosives that hit. Who cares? You didn't hit them. You didn't hit them. It's year 3. This is your roster now. You're telling us that you trust these guys. These are your guys. Win or be gone. Bottom line, win or be gone. And unfortunately, you did not win yesterday. The path forward is very difficult. We've talked about it all offseason. Florida has to bank wins at the beginning of 2024 to have a chance to overachieve their Vegas win total at 4.5. And I got to be honest, Vegas looks pretty darn smart once again. But that 4.5 line, the path forward is very, very difficult, Neil. It's very difficult. And I don't see, we'll talk about it later, but I don't see really a path forward for this team, barring an incredible run that is completely unforeseen by Billy Napier in this football team.
Yeah, well, I mean, I see a path. It was what we talked about before the show. It's hypothetical versus realistic. Yeah, there's a path.
Correct.
Florida could win 11 games in a row, and he's back, or win 10 in the next 11 and finish 10-2 or 9-3. He'll be back. But we're gonna look at the games that Florida has to play and go, yeah, there are 9 wins there. No, no, they're not. I mean, in theory, there are. I mean, LSU beat Florida in 2020 with their scout team. So yeah, anything's possible. But is anyone, if you were hooked up to a lie detector test, or you were pinned down and you were forced to bet your life savings on every single Gator game left, one way or another, you can't not bet the game. You have to bet your life savings on the result, who wins, who loses. You're not going to pick Florida 9 times. Are you crazy? Like, no. There again. Keep it respectful, but keep it real. There has to be a level of, this is the situation. This is what these teams look like. This is how they have recruited. This is who is on their coaching staff. This is what this coaching staff has done in the recent past. The recent past is a predicting factor for the future. This is what logic, reason, and data tell me is most likely to happen. In Florida, by the way, could pull an upset. We saw lame duck Will Muschamp knock down Georgia. We saw Ron Zook beat FSU when he was already fired. Could happen, but most likely not more than once. And Florida's going to need to pull more than one upset if they're going to win enough games to keep Napier's job.
Yep. And the last point I'll make in discussing kind of just the realities of year three. I mean, look across the country. There are several coaches now entering year three, and they look much farther along than where Napier's at now. I mean, look at what Oregon has done. And Dan Lanning, same situation, year three, competing for a college football playoff berth. They look ready to go. They're winning battles all over the trail, all over the country. Year four over in Texas, I mean, national championship or almost a game away from a national championship appearance last year in Steve Sarkisian's third year. So, I mean, it's in this age of college football to say that you can't get it done by year three is just wrong. It's devoid from reality, and it's a matter of you're not getting the job done. So we'll talk about now why the Gators didn't get the job done, and we'll analyze both sides of the ball. We'll talk about offense first, and I think that's kind of really was the real crux of it, Neil, is that the offense just struggled all day to move the football up and down the field. I mean, we talked about it. Only 268 total yards, a third of those yards coming almost on one play from Montrell Johnson Jr. The right side of the offensive line is exactly the concerns of what we have been hearing came to fruition. The right side just could not block, could not protect Graham Mertz. It was the reason why he ended up getting hurt on that one play when he was hit cussed and threw the interception that ultimately really put the game on ice. The time that Montrell Johnson busted the 7-yard run, it was on the left side of the line that was able to seal it off. Shout out Austin Barber, great block there. But this is just goes to highlight, Neil. We've been talking about this now for years. The ineptitude of offensive line recruiting rears its ugly head time and time again for this program. And it's rearing its ugly head once again in this matchup where you talked about it. Florida lost two battles to Miami for 5-star recruits and Francis Mauigoa and Samson Onkunlola, two guys that bullied Florida's defensive line yesterday. And those are guys we needed to have. Florida hasn't landed a top 100 offensive lineman in 9 years. 9 years. An SEC program hasn't landed a top offensive lineman in 9 years.
To be fair, Rod Kearney was close, but not top 100.
Still, not a top one. I mean, look, not a top 100 player at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And even still, if I were to go extrapolate that out to top 150, I don't think the number would be very high. We're not
Also,
the
Saibo, but was a portal guy that we got. But
sure.
nonetheless, yes, the larger point is absolutely true.
Right. And I mean, what's crazy too is I think we could make an argument that the best offensive line that Napier had was actually 2 years ago in his first season when Saibo was starting at the guard
And he
position.
inherited most of it from Mullen
Yeah,
and
from
John
John Hevesy,
Hevesy.
your favorite human being
My
from
man, John Hevesy. Yeah.
yep. So, you know, I don't know. I think it really at the end of the day, The issues with offensive line or the issues with our offense stem from the offensive line and our inability to protect the quarterback. We know that Graham Mertz is not a mobile guy. He needs time to be able to step back and throw the football and find his receivers and make those big plays. He didn't have the time yesterday. He was under duress, sacked, and then knocked out of the game ultimately. And that could happen again this season if we're not careful. Fortunately, it wasn't a season-ending injury. He's in concussion protocol. He may or may not go. He's questionable for the Sanford game. We'll get more updates as the week goes on. DJ Lagway, we got to see him a lot faster than I think people were expecting in that capacity as the QB1, and he played admirably. He led a touchdown drive that made the score somewhat a little bit more respectable. It wasn't a 30+ point blowout then because of the drive he was able to lead. He showed his ability to shake off would-be defenders and get upfield and scramble and make plays with his feet. And that definitely is an element of the offense that we don't have with Graham Mertz. And you could sort of mask the issues of not having the right offensive lineman. But we still saw in the game when he threw the interception, he got hit from the right side. And he threw an interception up in the air when he was trying to go deep because he didn't have enough time once again. So I think, Neil, in my opinion, the offensive line, I mean, we can talk about play calling and creativity, but offensive line is the biggest problem with this team, and it's going to keep us from being an offense that could make people have to game plan against us.
Yeah, I mean, two very quick points first before I address the larger point. Number one, Austin Barber, who made that seal block on the Johnson touchdown run, a John Hevesy recruit, not a Billy Napier or Rob Sale recruit. That's number one. Number two, Rod Kearney, I just looked it up, was number 112. So pretty close. The spirit of the statistic doesn't really hold there, but the raw statistic does. So close enough for my purposes, because there's always a slight margin for error with that. But nonetheless, even if you were generous and gave him a top 100 status, that still is one in 9 years from the high school ranks. Saibo was a portal guy, was great, but that was only for 1 year. Rentals don't really do you good in the long term. That's number two. And then the offensive line as a whole, I mean, again, I just go back to what I said at the start of the show, Chris. Like either Napier is simply mistaken and truly doesn't know what the F he's talking about, or he lied to us. It's one of those two. You don't hear all those good things. You don't see all these reports from all these different people who are getting a lot of their information from the coaching staff, because a lot of these practices are closed now. Some of them, yes, are open, but not enough of them for you to have a large enough sample size for people on the ground there to get really good gauges on what they're going to see in the fall. So again, Napier is either just a incompetent head coach. He's either just a loser or he is a liar. Like I said, that's just the most basic and simple way to put it. And again, yes, there's going to be more context to that. It's not meant in an ad hominem way. There's, data and facts behind it. But in one of those two fashions, I think we see what we have here. We have a guy who is capable of standing in the rain and telling us it's a sunny day. And whether or not he genuinely knows the difference between rain coming down on his head or not, or he just likes lying, this is what we have. Because again, there were so many different reports that maybe the right side of the line was a concern. Yes, we got that report ourselves. I've heard, I think you have different people talking to you than talk to me. But we heard that there was progress being taken, that the strength and conditioning program had taken steps, that Tyler Miles was doing a great job. And there were pictures that showed it, but that doesn't really prove anything, does it? Because anyone can look jacked, but when it comes time to put the ball down and go up against another set of players that are not on your team, you see what you have for real. And again, Miami is a good team. Like we said in the instant analysis piece we did from the Swamp live, Miami's good. They're not that good. They're not good enough to beat you down by 4 touchdowns on your home field. Now, I will
They
say,
shouldn't be. They shouldn't be.
Well, yes,
And I mean,
correct.
because if you look at the going back to the talent composite, we talked about it in this matchup.
Florida's ranked ahead of Miami in that.
Florida's ranked ahead of Miami, and even still, if you say, let's say, for example, like Cam Ward, you really you can't quantify. I don't think in that ranking how good certain transfers can be in their impact because you just they have experience. That ranking is really predicated more so on the high school recruiting ranks. But the fact of the matter is they're close enough in roster talent that if you're playing at home in the opening game, you should be a lot closer than 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, right.
Bottom line.
My point is in saying this, and there are a lot of Miami fans who are troll watching this. I know. So I will eat some
We
crow here.
appreciate them listening and
Yeah,
commenting,
we
by the way.
do.
Please
We
comment all
give us
away
that
down
click.
below in
Yeah,
the comments. We love that.
absolutely.
We love that.
Like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Kane, Gator, Noel, who was getting
We'll
little
take Georgia fans
payback.
too if they'd like to come in
Yeah,
here as well. Yeah.
dogs,
All
whatever.
of you, come on
All
in.
of them. Yeah, by all means, we'll take them all. But the point being, to those Miami fans, I will shake your hand. Good game. You guys beat us down. You get that. You get to celebrate that. And I think truly, you have a better team than I thought. You don't have a better team than Georgia. You don't have a better team than Texas. You don't have a better team, I think, than LSU or Ole Miss. I'm not even sure you have a better team than Tennessee. And Florida has to play all of them. What are we
I
going to
see
see
your
in those games?
I see your point. Yep. No, I see your point. Well, I mean, offense, and another point I want to make because we'll get it back to the discussion on just kind of what analysis of the game on the offensive side of the ball. They're just once again the play calling seems to have no creativity. And there are a lot of reports, Neil, I think you alluded to it yesterday, that Russ Callaway had a lot more input on this game plan than meets the eye, had a lot more impact on the play calling than meets the eye, or what we were led to believe, because a lot of us were told that Billy Napier was going to be the play caller still. But apparently Russ Callaway is pretty much the guy from what we're hearing and from sources inside the program. Not that Napier's not calling any plays or has impact on the plays, but Russ Callaway was given the play sheet. He's up in the press box. He's calling plays down to the field. So there was no difference. Bottom line, there was no difference. But we were still seeing all the orbital motion, the 12 formation. And the problem with those offenses where you have all of the motion, it takes time for the plays to develop. And when you have a right side of the offensive line that can't protect the quarterback's blind side, it's not going to work. And unfortunately, that I think we do have a lot of good athletes on, obviously Eugene Wilson, Elijah Badger, I actually thought showed some really good capabilities in this game. That back shoulder throw from Graham Mertz down the sideline is an element we didn't have in the offense last year. Khalil Jackson still shows that he can get separation down the field vertically. Arlis Boardingham still can be a weapon in this offense as well. I feel really bad for actually a lot of these receivers because I don't think they were able to fully showcase the separation they were getting on the Miami receivers. The weakness of Miami's team is their secondary, and it's going to show up when they play a team with a better offensive line down the road. And if it's not during the regular season, because their schedule really is a cakewalk, it's going to show up in the college football playoff when they potentially play some of the teams that you mentioned, that we don't think they're better than. Florida needs, though, an offensive line to be able to protect Graham Mertz, to be able to get the ball down the field to guys like that. He also needs to lead his receivers better. There were 2 deep throws to Elijah Badger where he did not lead him to the end zone. If he would have thrown the ball where he was able to run under it, probably would have been 2 touchdowns. Probably missed 2 touchdowns in that game. And I mean, not that that would have made a difference, but certainly could have swung the momentum back into Florida's favor and kept it close for us to at least been within striking distance. But because Mertz has to hurry and can't really set his feet in the pocket and be comfortable due to the pressure, he's going to miss on throws like that. I do think Mertz can hit a deep ball. I mean, I'm not saying he's has the best arm strength in the world. He doesn't, and Lagway definitely has a better one. But if you're under duress the entire game, you're not going to hit those throws like you should be. The timing is going to be off, and that showed up in this game on the offensive side of the ball. All right, Neil, let's talk about defense here in this game. Defense did not get enough pressure to Cam Ward, they did have a better success rate of actually applying the pressure than they did last year. According to PFF, they were 4% points higher than their average last season, so marginally better. But the problem is that Cam Ward was able to elude those defenders, shake the pocket, and hit some throws on the run that he had not shown that he could hit before. We talked about how on the road last year, a 47% completion rating. He was well over 50% in this game, and he actually hit two, I would think, two touchdowns on the run, including that one just dime to Xavier Restrepo
A
in the back of
Heisman
the end
moment
zone.
play.
I mean, it really was if he ends up hitting it. I think it was two toe tap in the back of the end zone too. It was
Yeah,
it was pretty remarkable. I mean, it
great
was
catch.
yeah. So I mean
And
he played a great
yeah,
game.
that's part of what I mean when I say Miami is a better team than I thought they would. That Cam Ward, which by the way we saw the turnover that we kind of expected because he made a
Yep.
very bad decision. Shamar James made a great play, but that's
Yep.
still a bad decision to give James the opportunity to make that play. But Cam Ward outplayed all of what we had heard that he was going to do on the road. And let's face it, the Pac-12, the former Pac-12, is other than maybe Oregon, does not compare to the swamp, at least not when the swamp is what it's supposed to be. Now, there did seem to be a bit of a drop off in the swamp's environment yesterday, but a large part of that was because the team didn't give the fans the opportunity to really get up and make a difference other than the one play that Montreal Johnson hit. Again, Austin Barber, I see you. I notice you. Great seal right there. But aside from that, there was nothing to cheer about, especially not when right after that, the momentum just gets punctured like you're putting a pin in a balloon when Miami goes right down the field and scores again to regain a two-score lead. Oh, and by the way, they get ball to start the third quarter, which quickly makes the score even more lopsided. So, point being, the Miami offense, I think, is a very good offense. I think that Florida's defense is going to face better offenses than that. And if they can't apply any pressure, Florida didn't get a single sack until there were 12 minutes left in the game. For all we had heard, for all we had talked about, for all that we ourselves are guilty of this. We hyped them up. Um, I think that Cam Jackson just didn't have the best game. I don't think Joey Slackman had the best game. I think that those are two of the harder working guys that I've covered. I've heard people in those buildings tell me when things are looking good for a player and when things are not looking good for a player. They have said great things about Cam Jackson and Joey Slackman, but for all we heard, we didn't see any results. And something that I'm sure you'll talk about, and we'll talk about more throughout the year because there are more teams that Florida faces that they go up head to head against for recruits. The recruits that Miami beat us for made big differences. And you talked about the two on the offensive line. How about Mark Fletcher? Two touchdowns for the Miami offense in that game. So, again, this is a situation where I think that Miami is a legitimate football team and should win the ACC. If not, I mean, if Clemson doesn't
I
really
mean,
show me
based on
something on
yesterday's
offense,
results, they've got to be the massive odds on
yeah,
favorite now to win the ACC.
right. So, and maybe FSU bounces back from that loss, but Miami's the favorite for sure. But Florida's going to face better teams than that. So the Gators better figure something out real quick on that front line because if they don't, they're going to look worse than they looked against Miami. And that is a horrifying thought.
Yeah. No. And really quick, I want to comment on something you just talked about there is that we hype them up. And we see comments in our show down below all the time. Oh, you said this. You're hyping these guys up. You're gassing them up. I mean, Neil and I are telling you things we're hearing from inside the program. That I mean, so we're being told things that ultimately aren't true, or the coaches just aren't putting the players in the right positions, or the players aren't executing on the field. Sorry, I mean, like we were open and honest, and we've said before the season, we're concerned about the right side of the offensive line. We were honest about that. And we were right about that. The right side of the offensive line was bad yesterday. It was one of the primary reasons why the offense couldn't move the ball. We reported it. We said that. I think the one thing we were a little concerned about is the pass rush. We said that we needed pass rush. Otherwise, the secondary, who we did a really good job of upgrading, we felt would struggle. They can't guard for 7 seconds. I mean, Cam Ward had enough time to bake a pizza back there at times. And because of that, eventually receivers are going to get open, and they did. And that's when they exploited us for deep plays and explosives, which was a key that I said in the game. Florida had to have more explosives than Miami. Newsflash, they didn't. It wasn't even close. So we're hearing things from people inside that are connected to the staff, and they're telling us, and then we're going to tell you what we hear. But today we're not going to sugarcoat it because what we hear isn't good anymore. It's a complete 180 of the hype of us having any hope of overachieving for the season. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case anymore. And we'll get into that here in our next segment. But
And what we
to
heard was
put our
wrong, by the way. Before today, what we had heard on a lot of positive fronts, we will come right out and we will just say, yeah, we were wrong. They were wrong, but we were wrong because we reported it and we talked about it. So
Yep.
that's just
Well,
how it
I think
goes.
moving forward, I'll borrow a line from an old coach in press conferences. He'll say, "That's all me. I'll get that fixed." So here at the All Kinds Weather Forecast, we'll get that fixed. We'll until we see results on the field, results on the field that lead to wins. Neil, I'm not ready to gas this program up anymore.
I don't think they deserve it. And the crazy thing is, I would kill to have Will Muschamp back after what we're seeing right now.
At least he showed some. At least he showed some damn passion.
Will
There's no
Muschamp
passion. There's nothing like. And I said at halftime, I said I would be tearing shit up in that locker room if I were a coach based on that performance. And I highly doubt that is exactly what happened in that
Nope.
locker room at
Because you
halftime.
know that Napier is, again, just who he is the opposite. Will Muschamp never lost to Tennessee. Will Muschamp never lost to Kentucky. Will Muschamp never lost to Arkansas. Will Muschamp at least beat Georgia in FSU sometimes. Will Muschamp at least had a winning season. He had
He didn't
multiple
lose to
winning
he didn't
seasons.
lose. Oh, he did lose to Vanderbilt. My bad.
He did.
I should remember that one.
But at least he had a winning record against them.
Yeah.
He also lost to Georgia Southern. But barring the
With
loss,
a scout team. With a scout team.
true, true.
Let's be fair. With a scout team.
Skyler Morningweg, a quarterback, not exactly the Gator standard. Which, Chris, that's kind of a topic of conversation now, isn't it? The Gator standard.
Yeah, it was by a former head coach as well. And we said, like, look, I said going into this game, the Gator standard, the standard at the University of Florida is championships. It's those blue letters and numbers up on that orange wall. That's how you're measured. And if you're not doing the things that lead to that, unfortunately, we have to part ways. It's not personal, it's the game of football. And I like Billy Napier as a person, like Neil said. But now we're going to talk about Billy Napier and his future here at the University of Florida. So, Neil, you and I sit very close to each other at the game this season. I'm excited at least about that. It's one thing to look forward to this season. You looked at behind, I can't remember, I think it was after the interception, I want to say. The deep interception when Graham Mertz got hurt. You turned around and you want to give the motion that you said you
Yeah.
didn't need to even mouth the words. You just did a motion. What was it? Yep. It was that. So if you're watching on YouTube, it was, just a slash across his neck. And
If you're listening on audio and you can't see video, I did a throat slash motion. Of
yeah,
just putting my hand across my throat and just cutting it
it's over.
because it's guillotine time. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but we I'll put it this way. There is a three-word phrase that is always very common when the fan base collectively has had enough. The first word is fire. Those last two words are the first name and the last name of the head coach. I'm not going to say it that way. I'm going to say it in the sense that we have reached the point in time where I do not rationally or logically believe that this head coaching tenure is going to continue. And the reason that I say that is because the Gator program is in a historically bad place. And that's not an exaggeration. That's not hyperbole. That's not overreacting in the heat of the moment. As Chris said, this is the next day. 24 hours have elapsed since the clock hit zero in that Miami game. So if you're still one of those who supports Billy Napier and wants to give him more time, Here comes what I believe is the best way to counter that. It is a barrage of plain hard facts. Number one is what we all know, the 11-15 overall record. That's really bad. Nothing more to say there. 9-15 against FBS opponents, because two of those wins of his 11 were against FCS opponents. 7-15 against Power Five teams. He has won barely, no, he has won fewer than a third of the games he has coached against Power Five opponents. He is 1-8 against his rivals. That's Miami, that's LSU, that's Tennessee, that's Georgia, and that's FSU. He is 1-3 against rivals in the swamp. He is 1-4 against what I would argue are the three historically weakest teams, or at least three of the four historically weakest teams in the SEC. Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and Kentucky. He has a combined 1-4 against those teams. He has lost the last three games he has coached in the swamp. For comparison, Urban Meyer lost two games in the swamp in 5 years by a combined 4 points. Billy Napier has lost more games in the once feared and revered Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in the last three games he has coached than Urban Meyer lost in half a decade. Napier is staring a third losing season square in the face. And do you know what that would mean? Well, we talked about part of what that would mean in the pre-show. The last coach to start his tenure with three straight losing seasons, Josh Cody, in the 1930s, before the start of World War II, before Nazi Germany invaded Poland. It has been 85 years and 14 Gator football coaches since one started off that badly. Also, for all the frustration over Ron Zook, Will Muschamp, and Jim McElwain, those three guys coached a combined 10 seasons. 8 of them were winning seasons. So between the three of them, there were only 2 losing seasons. That means that it is very likely, given the road that's ahead that we've talked about all off season long, it is very likely that Billy Napier is going to have more losing seasons at Florida in 3 years by himself than Ron Zook, Will Muschamp, and Jim McElwain had combined. And now, after all of that, after all of those facts, now you throw in exactly how Florida lost. Now you add in the fact that Miami just embarrassed us in the swamp. Now you include the data that Cristobal and Napier came into this game with nearly identical records after being hired 8 days apart. And by the way, with Cristobal getting the benefit of doing it in the ACC, now you add in that Napier either is a loser or a liar. Now you add in all the data from that game. So the question, am I out? I was probably going to be out, or at least very close to it, with any kind of loss to Miami. Now, I reserve the right to be less binary than that. If Florida got screwed late by the refs, or Mertz threw a very uncharacteristic pick, or something very unusual happened, like I talked about in my Law of Averages show with Ricky Pearsall. By the way, shout out to him. Glad to know he's doing better after a horrible incident where he was shot in a robbery. We wish him all the best. Obviously, football is what we're talking about, but life is so much more important than football. But anyway, in the Law of Averages, so I mentioned how Ricky Pearsall is the one that fumbled against Arkansas and got scooped and scored back. And I was like, really? Like him? That guy? The hardest working guy on our entire team, the guy that's never going to make that kind of mistake, he makes that mistake. Some kind of weirdness like that happened to lose Florida in the game. Maybe I would say, all right, let's give him more time. Let's see Texas A&M. But with the way that game went down, it's over. This is done. We're finished here.
Yeah, I think going into this game, there were 3 camps. There was a camp that maybe was about a third or 40% of the fan base that did not think he was going to make it at Florida. They already had their minds made up after year 1, year 2. There was, I think, the camp you and I fell in this one, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we were kind of in wait and see mode. Like we want him. We obviously are, I think every Gator fan was rooting for him, but we were rooting for him. We felt that he could, if he overachieved this year, he was going to be able to make it another year. And then with Lagway and some other recruits that he's brought in, could seemingly make that big jump in the year four. And then there's the camp that just all in on Napier. They love Napier no matter what. And I think that was a very minute bit of the fan base. After yesterday, volume or camp three is gone completely. And camp two, you and I is, I would say, less than 5%. And that's maybe generous. I don't see how Napier can save this. And, Neil, you went into all of the statistics, like you talked about Coach Josh Cody in the 1930s. It's been a long time since we've had a coach at Florida do this poorly. Tom Lieb was the last one to finish with a losing record after 6 seasons between 1940 and 1945. That was during World War II. It There's been so many good coaches since then that have at least had a winning record, put together something that was an average mediocre product. What we're seeing is below mediocrity. And we cannot let the standard of what Florida football is slip. Like I said a moment ago, the standard is championships. Florida's won 3 national championships in the last 28 years. No, to people like Tim Brando and other people out there that have said Gator fans are just impatient or they just don't understand who they are. No, we understand completely who we are. Look behind me. Look behind me. That's the standard. That's the standard. Heisman Trophy winners, national championships, SEC championships, All Americans, Gator greats, success on the gridiron. This is not it. This is we, and I gotta say, shout out to the fan base. 90,544 strong. We deserve better yesterday. A lot of us actually stayed. We were singing "We Are the Boys." We were singing Tom Petty still. I thought it was going to be a really lackluster effort. It sounded like we were honestly winning the game. And that just goes to show these fans, we love that freaking logo. We love that logo. We will love it for till the day we die. Some of us went to school there. Some of us have family members that went there. We love the Florida Gators. We're willing to drive 7 hours. Some of us, like Neil from South Carolina, myself, 2 hours, and we're willing to do it every freaking weekend because we love the Gators. But we also understand that there's a standard to uphold. And as fans, we are allowed to be upset when it's not. And yesterday was an embarrassment. It was a flat out embarrassment of a rival who is a shell of our tradition, of what we believe for and stand for. And I know we can be better than them. So unfortunately, at this time, I'm out on Billy Napier. I hate to say that out loud. I'm always one of the last people to uh, end on a coach before other people. But yesterday was my moment. I think back to the moments when I was out on certain coaches. For me, for Dan Mullen and for Jim McElwain, it was the Georgia games. In 2017, it was the 42-7 thrashing after he embarrassed us for a month and some of the death threat lies that he put out there on the program. With Dan Mullen, it was after the comment about how we'll talk about recruiting during recruiting season, and then he proceeded to get his butt whooped 34-7 in Jacksonville by a coach that laughed all the way after that comment as he continued to thrash him on the recruiting trail. And it was Will Muschamp. It was the 42-13 loss at homecoming on Missouri, the only Gator game I've ever left early. It was those moments when I realized we were done on a coach. Yesterday, the 41-17 game against Miami was when I realized we're done on Billy Napier.
I gotta
So
say, I gotta say, I'm one of the first usually because I see the warning signs and I don't ignore them. Um, I mean, part of me really thought that with the upgraded roster and the new strength and conditioning coach and the new all new defensive assistants, part of me really thought that this was going to be a little better. Not a lot better. There were no illusions for me that this was going to be a national championship team. I said
we never even came close to
no,
saying that. No.
no, we did not. I said I think this is going to be 6-6 or 7-5, but I was also one of those who understood that the strength of schedule was a real thing. It was a daunting gauntlet that lay ahead of us. But I, you and I came to this Conclusion, me being one of the first to say goodbye, you being one of the last. It was the same game that did it for us. We are on
Yeah.
opposite sides of that spectrum. It was the same day in the stadium where 4 rows apart, where like I
I
mean,
think
there's
I think
no defending it anymore.
everybody felt it. Everybody felt it yesterday, and a lot of my friends and family who think felt very similar about Napier as I did and you did, Neil, all are on the same page now. We're all on the same page, and it's unfortunate that, listen, we don't ever want to call for a man. We're not calling for a man's livelihood or calling for a man's job, but I mean, at the end of the day, the man's going to walk away with $26 million. He'll
That's the other thing
he'll
too.
be okay. Like, I mean, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, he'll be okay. He knew what he was doing when he signed up for this gig. He said it in his press conference. He said, if I can't get a squad of 25 guys in a good recruiting class, that means you're going to be finding a new head coach soon. Well, 3 years later, I think we're at that point. And,
Yeah.
unfortunately, there's some hurdles, I think, before we get there. Some internal hurdles within the administration. As many know, we don't have a university president right now, a permanent one. Most likely that won't be the case until January. Scott Strickland would be hiring his third head coach. And I've got news for people out there. You don't hire three head coaches when you failed on the first two. And I'll leave it at that for the moment.
There's
I'm going
more
to be put,
comment on that, by the way.
we're going to be, I'm going to be putting out a show later this week to kind of talk a little bit about what needs to happen from an administration, from a infrastructure standpoint before we could even talk about the head coach, the next head coach of Florida. Because a lot of people were like asking who your top five, right? Who's your coaching wish list board? And I'm like, honestly, there's a lot more that's got to happen before we get there. A lot more has to happen. I mean, the hot name is Kiffin. And for anybody out there, Kiffin put up 772 yards and 76 points last night against Furman. Yes, it's Furman, but that's what you're supposed to do when you play Furman. So that's the name everybody's talking about. We'll see. But it's a long ways away. He's one game in his season. We're one game in our season. We won't honestly know for several more weeks what's going to happen. But I can definitely tell you that people are moving. There's noise in the system, Neil. Maybe going into yesterday, there was a faint murmur of sound. It is now deafening to the point where it resembles an insane asylum that was Ben Hill Griffin Stadium after some of its greatest moments. It's loud. There is noise in the system. You can't ignore it. We are DEFCON 5. It's time to start thinking about the future of this program and what it's going to take to get us back to the championship standard that we are capable of getting to. And like, look at University of Miami. I'll use them as an example. They've won 5 national championships in the last 40 years. It can be done at a school like Miami. So that's why they didn't accept mediocrity and they went out. And while they had a coach, I'm not going to condone the way they operated this coaching search last time when they kind of kept a guy on the lurch and Manny Diaz and then went out and was courting Mario Cristobal, but they got their guy at the end, and look at what it's doing. It's starting to pay off. They're a playoff contender in year 3 where you're supposed to be at that point in the program. So things are going to move, I think, Neil, with this pretty quickly, depending on how things go. Now, I think it's fair to say we at least need to say what Napier would have to do to pull off the 0.1% chance of a miracle, and that is he pretty much has to run the gauntlet to Georgia unscathed. Am I wrong? I mean,
Yeah,
maybe he
no,
could slip
that's
up one more time, but like no,
but to who?
no worse to five, no worse than 5-2
That's the
going into
question
that.
though. To who can he
Well,
afford to slip up?
so let's talk about
We,
that. I
we
have
can
the
go game by
schedule.
game. We're
I
gonna
do
just
have the
skip
schedule.
Stanford because you lose that one, and like that's interim coach territory.
You might as well. If he loses to Stanford, I will drive down to Gainesville, spend a week packing his house for him,
Yeah.
along with Scott Strickland.
So let's start with A&M.
So A&M last night, year 1 of Mike Elko, took the number 7 team down to the wire in their home opener, nearly won that game. It was a 10-point loss, but they had to go for it on 4th and 7 in their own territory. They kicked a field goal to make it a 10-point game. Like that was a one-score game the entire way. A&M played strong. They didn't play great on offense, but they played great on defense. They come to the Swamp in 2 weeks. They're 4.5-point favorites. ESPN gives them nearly a 60% chance now to win that game. And for people that remember a couple of weeks ago, it was a 50-50 proposition on FPI. Florida actually was slightly favored. That's flipped in one night. So now we're 20% less likely to win that game, or 10% less likely to win that game. And the opening line was 3.5. Now it's 4.5. It's already moved a point. So we'll see how things go for A&M. Next week, they have another cupcake game themselves, looking at who they play really quick
But the
before
point is,
they
why
get
are you
to
looking
us.
that
But
up?
they play McNeese State. So they play McNeese
Yeah.
State, who we played last year,
Yeah.
and the game after Utah. They'll win that game. So both teams will be 1-1, probably unranked. But A&M are underdogs in. So then
You
you go
can't
to
lose
Miss.
that though.
You
But
can't lose
this is
that
what I'm
game.
saying. If we're going to go game by game, talking about who we play next, my question is, to whom can you afford a loss?
I
A&M,
suppose
no.
it's Tennessee. I suppose it's like the
To go
one.
to become 1-9 against your rivals?
Okay, but here, we're talking about the hypotheticals. So let's say if you do beat A&M, you should beat Mississippi State, although they did win their opener
You lose that
56.
one, and that's
Yeah. So
interim coach
okay.
territory too.
So essentially you can't slip up against the next three. You can't slip up against UCF. So
Right.
you've got to be 4 and let's say this. You have to be 4-1 going in the Tennessee game. I would say at the very least, if you do lose that game, you can't lose it like you did to Miami and get run out of the building. You have to be respectable. Then you have to beat Kentucky for homecoming, a team you haven't beaten yet in your tenure. That's 5-2. We've already basically baked into the cake that you're going to lose the next two to Georgia and Texas. That gets you to 5-5. Then you play LSU, Mississippi, FSU. That would
You're
mean you'd
five
have
and
to
four.
win.
So if you're 5-4 before the last three, not 5-5.
Well, no, I'm saying you'd be five and
Five and
oh,
four after
oh, you're
Georgia and
right. You're right.
Texas.
9. Okay, so 5-4 going into the LSU, Mississippi, and FSU stretch.
Right.
So that would mean you have to win at least one of those games to gain bowl eligibility and get to your mark of 6-6, Neil. And you would have to win all three to get to my mark of 8-4. And I mean, I said 7. If I said I was more closer to 7-5 than 9-3, I might 8-4. So I'm like 7-5, 8-4. So I mean, I know FSU didn't look great, so maybe that's one, or you can maybe pick off a crazy home upset against LSU or Ole Miss, but that's really the path, right? I mean, I guess that's the path
I don't,
forward.
I don't, I
Is
don't
is,
see, no, I don't
but
think
I
you
don't
can
see
afford
it.
a loss
I
to
don't see it
Tennessee.
either. Right.
I don't see where you lose again before Georgia, and realistically, he saves his job for next year. Because again, you lose to Tennessee, you're 1-9 against your rivals. You just can't do that. You
Neil, and for
can't
our list,
bat 10%
uh,
against your rivals.
yeah, I know, I agree. Neil, for our listeners, who are the rivals that you put into that record? Somebody actually asked me that yesterday when I put out that statistic.
Miami, LSU, Tennessee, Georgia, FSU.
Yep. Yep. And LSU because they were the Western Division rival that we've had that was baked in our schedule every single year. They weren't a rotational game like a Auburn or Ole Miss or somebody like
And
that. We
also
played them every year.
LSU has just been a nasty series ever since Hurricane Matthew. When the whole issue of, yeah, you guys are scared to play us, like you guys didn't have a hurricane turn your state into a freaking lake. So maybe a little sympathy would have been, cool in the wake of a disaster like that. But okay, LSU is a rival post 2016. Before 2016, I would say that was just like a big game. I would earmark that game in Death Valley in 16, the goal line stand in Tigerland, as I call it, as the start of a true rivalry.
Right. And I
But
mean,
just yeah,
even if you did the OG 3, which was Tennessee, FSU, and Georgia, you still only have one win, which is
right,
Tennessee last year in the swamp.
right.
So regardless, not great against rivals. And that's really it. I mean, at the bottom, I think Neil, you're right. I mean, realistically, you can't lose another game before Georgia. That means the upsets are going to have to be again. Because, I mean, we're going to be favored most likely against Samford, Mississippi State, UCF. I hesitantly say Kentucky. We'll see. I think that it's really contingent on how the season's going at that point. But then you're going to be, I would say we're underdogs in A&M and we're going to be underdogs against Tennessee. So we're going to have to pull at least one, maybe two upsets that we don't foresee. And you have to beat the teams that you're supposed to beat, which Napier to date has not shown that he can do. So most likely, it's just what we're saying isn't likely going to happen. Like I could see a scenario now I mean, before I thought this was crazy, but now like I could see us losing to I could see us beating Sanford, losing to A&M, so you're 2-2. Maybe eke out a win against Mississippi State. Okay, you're 3-2.
No. Stanford makes you 1-1. Losing to A&M makes
I'm
you
sorry.
one.
Yeah, so 2-2 after Mississippi State,
Yeah.
then maybe win UCF, so 3-2. But then Tennessee's 3-3, so 3-3 going into homecoming. I mean, no
But think
shot at
about
that
that.
point.
Think about what you're saying. Think about what you're saying. You're talking about starting 2-2 with a schedule that you know is exponentially harder in the
Right,
second half of the
right.
season. Like
No,
that's not viable.
and I
If
think that the
hypothetically speaking,
right,
yeah, he could win the
yeah,
next 10 games. I could wake up tomorrow with a freak of genetics happening overnight with a third arm. It could happen. Is it likely? Is there any logic that tells you it's probably going to happen? No. So
well,
that's the whole purpose of the all kinds of weather forecasts. We keep it respectful, as we have said. We never make this personal unless someone goes out
so
and embarrasses
so you
the
want to hear
fan
something
base.
great? Dustin's going to update his model this week, and we'll do a show. Dustin released his solo this week. Him and I are gonna start doing these shows together. But I'll go ahead and let you know the ESPN FBI for the next games until Georgia. So I'm skipping over Sanford. I already told you A&M 59% chance. Get ready for this, Neil. ESPN FBI 59.8% chance. Mississippi State beats Florida.
Doesn't surprise me. What
UCF.
we how many?
UCF. No, I'm not done. I'm not done.
Oh,
57.7% chance UCF wins. Tennessee, 87.4% chance.
yeah.
Kentucky, 54.8% chance Kentucky wins. Now, some of that is a little bit because they have their model just like Dustin has their models, and Florida probably has plummeted in a lot of models over the last 24 hours. So it's probably in all the teams that I mentioned, won in blowout fashion. Like Kentucky won 31 nothing.
Against
Tennessee won.
cupcakes, but yes.
Right. These are all cupcakes, but so that's padding the stats. Tennessee won 69-3. Mississippi State won 56-7. UCF won 57-3. The only team that we play going, the two teams that actually lost that we have ahead of us is Stanford lost 38-29 against an FCS opponent, and A&M lost 23-13 to the number 7 team in the country. So that's really what we're looking at going forward. But like we said, Neil, I think the reason why we're out on Napier is because of the historic nature of where he's at go in year 3. There is just really not a path forward for him, barring a complete act of God or miracle where he pulls off 5 to 6 wins between now and the cocktail party. It's just highly unlikely. And that is why at this time we are out, and we will be talking about potentially in the coming weeks what that looks like as we get more news. We hear things. We'll let you all know here. So make sure you continue to be subscribed down below, like this, and leave a comment on your reaction to yesterday's game, of course.
And we ask you guys who are commenting too, as I was trying to say before you cut me off with Dustin's updated FPI numbers. Keep it respectful, but we keep it
Yes.
real.
Yeah,
There's a level of
absolutely.
respect. We're talking about who we both believe to be a good man. Please keep it, civil, but be real. It's historically bad. That's being real. The statistics show it.
And I I'm gonna go here now because I think it's worth talking about before we kind of get into our final thoughts. But yesterday, Dan Mullen retweeted a tweet from his sidekick in the ESPN studios, Matthew Berry, who said Florida fired the coach who went to 3 New Year's Six bowl games for this. Now, Neil, my opinion on the matter is three things can be true here at once, right? Dan Mullen needed to be fired. Billy Napier needs to be fired. And Scott Strickland hired both of them.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I
And
would. All right, go ahead. Finish your thought. Yeah.
I think that because of all that, that's why Scott Strickland should not make the next hire. But to the point of Dan Mullen, they're not mutually exclusive. Two things can be true at once. Dan Mullen didn't give a care in the world about recruiting. And that's why the moment all of his players left the players from his predecessor, Jim McElwain, left the program, he didn't win with the guys he recruited because they weren't very good evaluations. Billy Napier has shown an ability to evaluate good talent, but he can't win with it because he doesn't know how to coach them up. And both are problems, both lead to losses, and both lead to you not being the head coach at the University of Florida.
Yep, that's pretty good synopsis. I would also add in when you're talking about Strickland that, oh, by the way, he just so happened to hire not one, but two different coaches of women's sports who ultimately had to be fired for abuse. That's also on his permanent record. He extended Mike White despite there being no objective reason to believe he was going to be the long-term answer to coach the Gator basketball program. I will say Strickland has done some good things in isolation. Chris, I think you can attest to this. I am close to as big a Gator baseball fan as Gator football. Baseball, I mean, I love Gator basketball, but for me, baseball is number two. I love that stadium. It's a beautiful ballpark he built. Contra Family Ballpark is gorgeous. I love going to watch games there. That's great. He did that in softball. I like Gator softball too. I've gone to plenty of games there. Great. He built a great new ballpark for Gator baseball and Gator softball. The IPF was, I think, 10 years too late, but sure, someone had to do that. So he stepped up, and I've toured it multiple times. I think you have too. It's great. It's a
Beautiful.
great thing that he did. But that does not come close to compensating for the football hire misses, which, by the way, seemed good on paper. Mullins seemed like the logical hire at the time. Napier was also courted by Auburn and South Carolina at previous points, so that didn't come from nowhere. And it really doesn't make up for the abuse scandals that he oversaw, which, by the way, even if you threw out the abuse allegations against Cam Newbauer, the women's basketball coach, he also had the worst winning percentage of any coach in the history of Gator women's basketball. Does that sound familiar, Chris? Does that ring a bell? Something we talked
Mm,
about earlier in this show? Yeah,
it does.
historically bad.
Yep.
It's so the motion I gave to you after that late interception, it's time.
It's like the Mark Cuban gif. I'm out. I'm out. I think that's what I tweeted after during the game yesterday. I was like, I'm out. It's done. One more final thing, just to not to put salt in the wound, but this came across me as we were talking. Coaches hired in 2022 records. Here
Oh
we go.
God.
All by Power Five schools. Kalen DeBoer, 25-3. Dan Lanning, 22-5. Brian Kelly, 20-7. Lincoln Riley, 19-8. Sonny Dykes, 19-9. Brent Venables, 17-10. Mike Elko, 16-9. Billy Napier, 11-15.
Mike Elko, by the way, did some of that at Duke. Billy Napier
Yes.
is at Florida.
Yes.
Oh, and Lincoln Riley also had a Heisman Trophy winner, just to throw that in there.
Also true. First overall pick.
So that's where we are, folks.
That's where we are. Well, guys, let's do the final thoughts, grades. Neil, I don't really think there's much else to say here, but let's grade this performance for offense, defense, special teams, coaching, overall grade. You go first.
All right. Offense is going to get a D, the worst possible grade you can get without failing, only because of the one play where Austin Barber did make a great seal block to spring Montrell Johnson. Johnson, of course, then showing the speed, coming back from the injury. Got to give him, golf clap. That was nice. Turning
Yeah,
on a
shout out. I mean, the
Brutus.
fact that he was able to rehab in like less than 3 weeks is pretty
Yeah.
incredible.
So he gets that, and also some bonus points for DJ Lagway leading that drive at the end. True freshman, first ever game.
Absolutely.
That was nice. So D. Defense gets an F because I feel like anytime you give up more than 500 yards, it's just an automatic F. And then you throw in how it looked, the defensive line looking atrocious, Cam Ward with that Heisman moment. Shamar James, I guess, gives the defense a few points. So as we've done in the previous years, I'll give a number grade for an F. I'll say it was like I don't know, a 40 out of 100, an F. Pretty clearly, solidly an F. Special teams, Trey Smack hit a field goal. Cool. Punting was fine. There were no duplicate jerseys. They didn't have a substitution infraction. I'll give them a C. There wasn't really anything terrible there. Coaching, you get nothing. You get a 0 out of 100. You could not possibly have done any worse. And that grade really stems from the offseason, where we had heard all about the strength and conditioning. We heard all about the retooling of the offensive and defensive lines, and it just didn't show. So I think that some of the play calling was questionable. I think calling a running play on a 3rd and 7 is not ideal.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I
That
think,
was awful.
yeah. So, but the point is, there wasn't anything egregious like the double reverse against FSU last year, or the Dante Sanders shovel pass against Utah. There was nothing particularly stupid. There was just your run of the mill average stupidity that we've seen from Napier as a play caller. Another example on a 3rd and 6. You throw a naked screen essentially, where you're asking Trey Wilson to break not one but 2 tackles there. Or you're thinking, well, maybe he breaks one, or maybe he falls forward and sets up a 4th and 3 or 4 on your own side of the field. However you want to slice that, that's just bird brain. That's underbaked at best. So there was nothing that I can say positive about the coaching staff. You get a flat out 0. Overall grade, solid F. There is a how else do you synopsize this? How else do you grade this? This is a fail any and every way you can possibly look at it. And for this year, I'll add one more for home games. The fans. I thought the fans did their job. I don't think they were given anything to get loud about. So the fans packed the swamp. It was a great atmosphere. I'll give them the solid B plus. With the caveat that, again, had there been more for them to get loud about, they would have, but we just will not know that.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much going to be on the same page here. So for offense, I agree. I'm going to give it a D for all the reasons you said. Just completely could when you can't block on the right side, it's going to lead to some really bad things, and it did all day. Mertz could not get anything going. Played his worst game as a Gator. Johnson did all he could, but he's one man. He's one man. So is Elijah Badger. So is Trey Wilson. They're only one individual. It takes a collective of guys to do it. Defense F. To me, nothing's changed. They can't get the pass rush, leaving the secondary completely exposed back there. Cam Ward was able to make plays with his feet and get loose and make extend plays and get them down the field with his arm. Special teams, I'll give it an A, and I guess that's because they literally did nothing wrong. And actually, shout out Chimry DK, he had some good punt returns. So, I think we found a punt returner that's actually a guy that's willing to field it and then make the punt return or the punt coverage team honest with that. I think he's actually showed an ability to shake guys loose and make some plays. So something to look forward to maybe in the upcoming games. There were, I counted 11 guys on the field every single time. I was actually counting every time we went out there. Made all our kicks, 40-yarder from Trey Smack. So, hey, perfect performance for them. Coaching, F, 0. You have 8 months to have a team ready for an opener. 2 years in a row, you flop. Completely
9,
flop.
by the way, because we didn't make a bowl game last year.
Well, good point. So 9 makes it even worse. You flopped. And it uninspired, no energy, no emotion, or play calling, like Neil mentioned. Everything's the same. It's the same as it has been. It doesn't look like it's going to change. That's why we're out on this coaching staff, unfortunately, and they get a 0 for us today. Overall performance, an F, a failure from this team, and it's unfortunate. And I agree. Shout out to the fans, like we mentioned. Also, shout out Katie Turner for blocking better than the right side of our offensive line of Miami players trying to come talk to our visitors, our visiting recruits. Shout out to her. She's a real one. If there's a way we can keep her on staff from the next staff, I hope we can, because she does a hell of a job along with a lot of people in that building. They do a hell of a job. So
She put
it,
her
it
hands on more Miami players than our entire defense all day.
that's accurate. That's accurate. All right, Neil. I hope everybody enjoyed their therapy session here today. All I can say is Gator Nation, just continue to support the logo, continue to support this program, these guys, even when it hurts. Eventually, better days will come. We don't know when they'll be, but hopefully they will soon. And from all of us here at the All Kinds Weather Forecast, thank you for tuning in. Like we said, please like the show, hit subscribe down below, leave a comment on your reaction to the Miami, Florida game and what you think should happen with Billy Napier. And if you're listening on audio formats, please rate, review the show. It helps bring Gator Nation great content. So from all of us here at the In All Kinds Weather Forecast, signing off.